Today we'll talk about one of the most famous battles in history, the Battle of Thermopylae. You might know it from the movie 300 that came out in 2006. Everyone remembers the story from the movie, a small group of 300 Spartans fighting against thousands and thousands of Persians. But how did this situation even happen? Why did the Persians attack the Spartans in the first place? And if the Spartans knew such a huge army was coming, why did they send only 300 soldiers? Also, Thermopylae is quite far from Sparta, so why did they choose to fight there instead of closer to home? And maybe the most important question, was it really only 300 Spartans in this whole battle? We're going to look into all of this. Think of this as the second part of a story about the Greek and Persian wars. The story really starts back around 490 BC. At that time, the Persian Empire was gigantic, one of the biggest the world had ever seen. If you look at a map today, the Persian Empire back then covered areas like Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, Afghanistan, and even parts of Pakistan. The king of this massive empire was Darius I. Now, Greece wasn't one big empire like Persia. It was made up of many small city-states. You can think of a city-state like a small kingdom, each with its own leader. Among these city-states, Sparta and Athens were very well known and respected. In 490 BC, the Persian army attacked Athens. The fight that happened there is called the Battle of Marathon. If you want to understand how all the tension between the Persians and the Greeks started, knowing about the Battle of Marathon helps a lot. Even though the Persians lost the Battle of Marathon, it didn't really hurt their overall power much because their empire was so huge. But King Darius was furious that Athens had beaten him. Right after the defeat, he started planning another, even bigger attack on Athens and the other Greek city-states. However, about 4 years after Marathon, Darius died. His son Xerxes became the new Persian emperor. Xerxes promised he would finish what his father started and make the Greek city-states submit to him. So Xerxes gathered soldiers from all over his enormous empire and put together a huge invasion force to attack Greece. He even built supply stations along the Greek coast. This showed everyone that Xerxes wasn't just planning a quick raid, he was planning a full-scale invasion. That's a little background on the Persian side. Now let's look at Sparta during that time. Sparta was quite different from the other Greek city-states. It started as a combination of 4 villages, and later a 5th one joined. The people from these villages felt they didn't need walls between them because they had strong bonds and trust. Another very unique thing about Sparta was that it had 2 kings ruling at the same time. These kings came from different royal families in Sparta, and they both had equal power. They would usually command the army together, but interestingly, they weren't given command of the same army group together. This was to prevent problems if the kings disagreed while on a military campaign. When Xerxes was getting ready for his big attack on the Greek city-states, Sparta had its 2 kings. One was Leonidas, the one everyone knows about, but there was another king named Leotychidas. Now, there's something about Leonidas that people often get wrong, especially because of the movie. The movie shows him as maybe 30 or 35 years old during the battle, like his fellow soldiers. But in reality, Leonidas was about 60 years old at the time of the Battle of Thermopylae. Also, Leonidas had 3 brothers, and the daughter of his eldest brother, named Gorgo, was actually his wife. Now let's talk about the armies. The Persian army had a reputation for being unbeatable because they had so many soldiers drawn from many different places within their vast empire. These different soldiers brought various skills and types of equipment, making the overall Persian army very hard to defeat. Greeks and Persians had fought before Thermopylae and Marathon during something called the Ionian Revolt. In most of those earlier fights, the Persians had won. The main standing army of the Persians was called the Spada. It mostly had 3 parts: infantry, foot soldiers, cavalry, horse riders, and sometimes camels, depending on where the battle was taking place. Interestingly, many Greeks were actually part of the Persian fighting force, and some Greek warriors even served as bodyguards for the Persian king. The Persian army was organized in a very advanced way for that time. The whole army was divided into units, and the number of soldiers in each unit was always a multiple of 10. Each unit had a name and a commander. For example, a unit of 10,000 soldiers was a Bivarabam, 1,000 soldiers was a Hazarabam, 100 soldiers was a Satabam, and 10 soldiers was a Dathabam. You see, always based on tens. Their main fighting strength came from their infantry. These foot soldiers usually carried similar weapons: a dagger, a short spear, and a bow. They also had a shield made of wicker. This shield wasn't great for blocking weapons in close fighting, but it could stop arrows and other things thrown from a distance. The Persian army also had many archers using advanced composite bows for that era, which could shoot arrows about 200 to 300 meters. Within the Persian army, there was a special group of 10,000 elite soldiers called the Immortals. These were their best warriors and also served as the king's bodyguards. They had different uniforms and weapons, making them stand out on the battlefield, and they were greatly feared. Among these 10,000 Immortals, there was an even more specialized force of 1,000 soldiers, the best of the best, called the Arshtabara, meaning spear bearers. These warriors stayed very close to the king, acting as his final line of defense. The Persian cavalry, the horse riders, were also very advanced for the time. Since the Greek side at Thermopylae didn't really have cavalry, the Persians had a big advantage here. A Persian cavalryman usually carried 2 spears, which they could throw or use for thrusting. Cavalry wasn't typically used for charging straight at the enemy. Instead, they were used for flanking maneuvers, attacking the enemy from the sides or from behind, while the main forces fought head-on. Just like a country today might have different states, the Persian Empire had different regions called satrapies. Each satrapy had a leader called a satrap. This satrap handled all the local government and military matters and reported directly to the Persian king, like Xerxes. The satrap was responsible for maintaining an army in the region, running the courts, and handling administrative tasks. So whenever the Persian king planned a big military campaign, he would ask the satraps to provide soldiers, ships, and supplies, and they were expected to deliver. Now, let's switch back to Sparta. Life in Sparta was incredibly tough right from birth. When a baby boy was born, elders would examine him. If the baby had any physical problems or seemed unhealthy, he was often left to die. Healthy boys were raised under very harsh conditions. When they turned 7 years old, some ancient writers say 14, they were taken from their families and put into a communal living system called the agoge. All the boys lived together here, and conditions were deliberately made even tougher. Inside the agog, boys were grouped together, each group with a leader. Life was extremely difficult. They weren't given shoes, forcing them to walk barefoot everywhere to toughen their feet. They were given only one simple robe to wear, regardless of the weather, and maybe most strikingly, they were given very little food, so they were almost always hungry. If they felt extremely hungry, they were encouraged to steal food. However, if they got caught stealing, they were punished severely. The idea was to make them tough, resourceful, and sneaky. When a Spartan boy finally graduated from the agoge after years of this harsh life, he moved into a slightly better situation. The warriors lived and ate together in barracks. Life here was a bit better than the agoge, but it was still focused entirely on military readiness. They had to continue with intense physical training and practice battle movements every single day. Once a Spartan man reached the age of 30, he became a full citizen. He was given a piece of land by the state, along with some slaves called helots. These helots worked the land, and the income generated from the farm supported the Spartan citizen. He used this money to live and, very importantly, to buy and maintain his own weapons and armor. These full citizens, called Spartiates, formed the core of the Spartan army, the hoplites, or main foot soldiers. The daily life of these Spartan citizens remained very demanding. They had daily exercises, physical training, and battle drills. Because of this incredibly rigorous lifestyle, Spartans generally looked down on people from other Greek city-states, especially Athens. They believed that Athenians were soft, spending time on things like democracy, art, and culture, while Spartans lived a hard, military-focused life. They felt this made them different and superior warriors. There was even a saying that Spartan warriors actually looked forward to battles because it was the only time they got a little rest from their non-stop daily training. Unlike modern armies where the government provides equipment, Spartan soldiers had to buy their own gear using the income from their land. Because of this, most Spartan hoplites had similar equipment. Their main weapon was a long spear, about 2 to 2.5 meters long. This was much longer than the Persian spears, giving the Spartans a reach advantage. Since the spear was their primary weapon, they mainly used it for thrusting forward, not throwing. Their second weapon was a short sword, called a xiphos, kept at their side as a backup for close fighting if their spear was lost or broken. Compared to Persian swords, the Spartan sword was short. The greatest strength of the Spartan soldiers was probably their armor, which was much heavier and stronger than what the Persians typically wore. They wore a bronze helmet, often in the Corinthian style that covered most of the face. For their body, they wore a bronze breastplate and backplate, covering their chest and abdomen. The movie 300 famously shows Spartans fighting bare-chested with six-pack abs, but that's not historically accurate. In reality, at Thermopylae, they would have worn their heavy bronze armor. They also wore bronze guards called greaves to protect the front of their lower legs. Their shield, the aspis, was also a key piece of equipment. It was large, round, and made of wood covered in bronze. Compared to the Persian wicker shields, the Spartan shield was incredibly strong. It was big enough to protect a warrior from their shoulder down to their knee. The way Spartans fought on the battlefield was completely based around this shield. Individually, Spartan warriors were skilled fighters, but their real power came from fighting together in a specific formation called the phalanx. A phalanx was typically made of 8 to 12 rows of soldiers standing extremely close together, literally shoulder to shoulder. Each soldier held his shield on his left arm, covering his own left side and the right side of the soldier next to him. This created a solid wall of shields facing the enemy. The strength of the phalanx depended entirely on every soldier holding his position and keeping his shield steady. That's why in battles, you'd see Spartans always marching and fighting in this tight, organized formation. It maximized the protection offered by their shields. You could say that a lone Spartan warrior was protected by his personal armor, helmet, breastplate, greaves. But when they fought together in the phalanx, it was the overlapping shields that protected the whole group. The shield was so important in Spartan culture that soldiers were expected to keep it with them at all times. Losing your shield in battle was considered a terrible disgrace. Now let's look at the strategy leading up to the battle. Sparta and its Greek allies, including Athens and several others, formed a military alliance called the Hellenic League, specifically to stop the Persian invasion. Initially, some other city-states, like those in Thessaly in the north, wanted to join the fight. They even sent 10,000 warriors to try and block Xerxes' army near Mount Olympus. But when they saw the sheer size of the Persian force, they realized they couldn't possibly stop them alone and would easily be surrounded. So they gave up without a fight and surrendered to the Persians. This probably made the Persians think that other Greek states might also back down when faced with their massive army. After the failure at Mount Olympus, the Greek allies decided together that the next best place to make a stand against the Persians had to be Thermopylae. If you look at a map, Thermopylae is a long way north of Sparta and Athens. So why did they choose it? A big reason was that there wasn't perfect unity among the Greek city-states. Everyone was a bit selfish and wanted to stop the Persian army as far away from their own homes as possible. Fighting far to the north served everyone's interest in keeping the invasion away from the southern heartlands. But why Thermopylae specifically? There was a very good strategic reason. Any large army invading Greece from the north by land had to pass through Thermopylae. The special thing about this place was that it was an extremely narrow pass. On one side was the sea, the Malian Gulf, and on the other side were steep, high mountains. This narrow path meant that the huge Persian army couldn't use its massive numbers effectively. They couldn't spread out and surround the smaller Greek force easily. The pass was already narrow, but there were also 3 points along it where natural obstacles made it even narrower. These choke points were sometimes called the gates. Near Thermopylae, there were also natural hot springs due to heat from the earth, which is why the place is called Thermopylae. It literally means hot gates in Greek. Some Greeks even believed this place was an entrance to Hades, the underworld. Now we get back to the question of numbers. If 10,000 soldiers from Thessaly felt they weren't enough, why did the Spartans send only 300 of their own citizens? Were the Spartans just that overconfident? Well, first, it's important to remember it wasn't only 300 Spartans. While Leonidas led 300 of his best Spartan soldiers, the force at Thermopylae also included soldiers sent by other allied Greek city-states. The total Greek force was likely several thousand, not just 300. However, the 300 Spartans were the core, the elite heavy infantry expected to hold the line. During the battle itself, which lasted 3 days, the Greeks initially used the narrow pass to their advantage, inflicting heavy casualties on the much larger Persian force. However, eventually, a local Greek named Ephialtes betrayed his countrymen. He showed Xerxes a hidden mountain path that allowed the Persians to go around the Greek position and attack them from behind. After some fierce fighting, King Leonidas was killed. Seeing their king fall, the remaining Spartans and some loyal allies decided to make a last stand, trying to protect Leonidas' body. They retreated slightly behind an old wall within the pass, but by this time, the Persian immortals who had used the secret path had completely surrounded them. Trapped from all sides, it's said the remaining Greek warriors were eventually killed by showers of Persian arrows. And so, on the third day, the Persians won the Battle of Thermopylae. While the land battle was happening at Thermopylae, another important battle was taking taking place nearby at sea, off a cape called Artemisium, about 40 miles away. This was a naval battle where the allied Greek fleet fought against the massive Persian fleet. The Greek ships managed to hold their own for a while, but when news reached the Greek fleet that Leonidas and his forces at Thermopylae had been defeated, the naval commanders decided to retreat to avoid being trapped and destroyed. They sailed south towards the island of Salamis. This retreat set the stage for the next crucial encounter, a huge naval battle at Salamis, which would be a turning point in the war. After the Battle of Thermopylae, when the Greeks found out about Ephialtes' betrayal, they were obviously furious. They put out a reward for his capture, dead or alive. Fearing for his life, Ephialtes fled. However, sometime later, he was killed, apparently for an unrelated reason, and the Spartans gave a large reward to the person who killed him. Technically speaking, even if Ephialtes hadn't shown the Persians the path, it's likely the Persians still would have won the battle eventually, given their overwhelming numbers. But the betrayal certainly sped things up, causing the Greek forces to be surrounded and defeated on the third day, perhaps preventing them from holding out longer and buying more time for the rest of Greece. The Battle of Thermopylae ended in a defeat for the Greeks, but it has gone down in history as one of the most legendary last stands ever fought. The bravery shown there became an inspiration. If you're interested in reading more about it, the book 3 Epic Wars That Saved Democracy is recommended for a factual account. For a feel of Spartan life and military culture, even though it's fiction, the novel Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield is highly recommended.